I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like. iMixWhatILike.org, at I Mix What I Like for all your relevant social media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to play your host. And today we're going to have a community movement builders inspired conversation about policing and community response to it. Want to add to the conversation, and to do that, we have two wonderful guests. First up with us is Dr. Mamyrah Prosper, of the Pan-African Solidarity Network. Dr. Prosper is an organizer in the United States and Haiti. She received her Ph.D. in Global and Sociocultural Studies with a concentration in Cultural Anthropology, as well as graduate certificates in African and African Diaspora Studies and Women's and Gender Studies from Florida International University. She also holds an MS in Conflict Analysis and Resolution from Nova Southeastern University, as well as a BA in Political Science and Africana Studies from Barnard College, Columbia University. Her doctoral work centered on coalition of social movement organizations calling for an end to the ongoing non-governmental occupation of Haiti. She is interested in the construction of neocolonial nationalist ideologies and collective identities in relation to race and class, gender and sexuality, education and language, and religion. Dr. Prosper has served as an organizer with land and housing rights organizations and Take Back the Land Miami. We welcome her to the program. And back with us once again is brother Yusuf Bunchy Shakur of the Detroit chapter and the Detroit chapter lead organizer and field marshal for community movement builders. Yusuf Bunchy Shakur is a father, author, educator, community organizer, and entrepreneur. He grew up in a struggling single-parent household surrounded by violence and crime, and eventually co-founded the notorious street gang Zone 8, which led to his incarceration at the age of 19 for a crime he says he did not commit. He met his father for the first time in prison, where they were both serving time. And during the sentence, he began a journey of transformation, in large part thanks to his father, from a gang member into a revolutionary who would eventually leave prison and continue on a path of redemption. Today, Yusuf travels the country to speak to youth about his experiences and to steer young people away from a life of violence and crime, and to organize for change in the neighborhood of Zone 8, where members of his family and many friends still live. Dr. Prosper Bunchy Shakur, welcome to the program. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So up at iMixWhatILike.org right now is a statement from community movement builders on ending the police occupation and terrorism against Black people. Dr. Prosper, let me start with you to talk a little bit about what ending police occupation and terrorism against Black people means to you in the context of obviously what's happening here in the United States and, of course, your broader work in the diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Well, Yusuf and I and a couple of other members of community movement builders worked on the document together. So we hope that it would reflect the different positionalities of the folks who make up our members. And, we attempted for it to be comprehensive, but obviously there's more analysis to be done, right? It's not the end all and be all of what we have to say, but it's an attempt to clarify some of the conditions, for folks in terms of what we're seeing. There's a way that a lot of us are talking about police brutality against Black people specifically, and disarticulating that from a critique of capitalism to the statement wanted to do, right? That work of connecting those things for us in terms of what we wanted to contribute to the conversation, in addition to the proposals, but for the proposals that we advance, to make sense, based on the analysis. So as far as your question about ending police occupation, again, understanding the roots of how policing in the United States is connected also to U.S. empire, right? This is, again, the work that the statement is doing. So we start out with a historical view of policing as far as it concerns particularly African descended people in the Americas broadly, right? And we see the deep connections between policing in general as a way to protect private property and the connections with African descended people who were considered property, right, at that point. And so again, this is part of the narrative that we're drawing to bring us to a present, to understand, right, that this police occupation, the fact that the lives of Black and brown people as well, right, this is something that the statement doesn't have enough room to unpack, right? So we talk about folks as African descended, right? So we hope that the folks who may identify as brown but understand that they're African descended see themselves in the narrative as well. Even if we need more room, right, to like break apart these categories, right, and how they intersect. But anyway, the point is that we wanted to trace a way to show how what we're seeing now, right, the more brutal face of the terrorism against Black people, right, is a continuation of a long history as far as what Black people have met, or what African descended people have met in the Americas, right, in connection to the colonial project. So that's, I'll let Yusef jump in, but what the statement wants to do is not just recognize this moment as something unique, but draw on the historical roots of policing in general, and even start to speak to the other ways that folks are being policed, which is not just the more flagrant recorded ways that we have seen, right? But in all the ways that Black and brown bodies are continually policed, right? And historically. So I'll stop there.
Well, actually, if both of you don't mind, I'd prefer that you not entirely stop for the moment, because it occurred to me, and I just, even honestly, I didn't even notice until you started talking that we have our Panamanian flag behind us in my shot here. And it, there's a moment sort of propping up online, at least, where of a sort of anti-Pan-African, anti-diasporan approach to the struggle of Black Americans, so-called, in this country. And I'm wondering if you could just talk for a moment about the importance of diaspora to these efforts, or why you think it might be important to consider the diaspora, brown people, as part of the African community, the Americas beyond the United States. Why shouldn't, for instance, George Floyd's family and others like that be saying our issue is specific to Black people in this country, and all of these other folks have a different relationship, and therefore why are you asking us all to be considered, or to consider our relationship to this issue of police occupation?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the George Floyd moment is important to step back, right, and clarify the ways that we've come to use a lot of these words and what they mean, right? Typically, when we're talking about Black, maybe folks assume that it's only, American descendants of slavery, right? Then it leaves out people like me, right, who are born and raised in Haiti, and live in the States, right, and share a certain experience, both in terms of the occupation and the police, violence that we all fear, but also, the stuff that brings us together, right, that's common about our experiences and like the things that we do and how we organize family, how we understand solidarity, right, and how we continue to struggle to define ourselves as human, right, in a place, the world that continues to say that people of African descent, right, are not fully human. So for me, the diasporic lens, right, is important, because I don't think that the issues of Black Americans at large are specific only to the United States, right? There are specificities about the United States, the 50 official United States, right? But if we are talking about the conditions of Black people in the United States, and we're not connecting that to, right, Haiti and the role that Haiti plays, right, and constructing our ideas of Blackness, or the continent plays, right, and our ideas about who Africans are, or are they human enough, right? That colors how Black Americans are seen in the United States. It's not very disconnected, really, right? And some of the policies that are driving or shaping the material conditions of Black Americans in the United States are the same types of policies that are driving the conditions of Black people around the world, right? So we can't unlink them, right? And how I see it, because U.S. is empire and it moves this way. And the statement tries to do that, right? Shows, right, the deep project of U.S. nation state making and U.S. empire making, right? And how it's exporting and importing policing tactics, right? So today the U.S. is bringing in a version of policing that is extremely militarized, based on its experience of decades worth of war and terror on the other side of the world, right? And the statement looks back at the 20th century and sees that Jim Crow in the United States, right, is also being exported when the US goes and occupies Panama, Haiti, right? It's bringing Jim Crow, right? So the US and anybody who that's, in the Americas, definitely that's in its purview, in its backyard, are all being understood together, right? Some of the folks who talk a lot about the 1965 Moynihan Report, right? The ways that that's come to construct ideas about, the welfare queen or the culture of poverty. This is some of the same dudes who are traveling in the United Nations and making commentary, right, about Black people. And Black people become fungible. African comes to stand for Haitian, comes to stand for Black American, right? There's a fungibility that we should push against, for sure, right? That there's a diversity, sorry to use that word, but there's a diversity between us, which is beautiful, right? But there's a way we've been funged that we have to also address, right? And anyway, so that's why, for me, that's the lens. And I think community movement builders is trying to hold those differences in one space under this umbrella, right, of Blackness. And the statement is attempting to do that, even if it doesn't do it perfectly and doesn't hit on all the points we would. We were trying not to drop something that was like 20 pages long because we're like, people aren't going to read this, right? So it's still, try to do a lot in a couple of pages as far as analysis.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Bunchy, please feel free to pick up on anything that's been said, but I did want to start by asking you specifically about, right now we're hearing a lot of discussion nationally about defund the police and to a lesser extent, abolish the police. Again, feel free to add to any of what you've heard already from Dr. Prosper, but I would also like you to address from your perspective and maybe the perspective of community movement builders, what does defund the police really mean? Or what does abolish the police really mean as we continue, going forward with this stuff?
First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge in the statement, we couldn't include all the names. And so anybody who reasoned like, why not this name or that name, we apologize on behalf of that. We did a very objective way. And most of the names are leeway to other names, right? They're sequence. And just want to state that because I think your original question around Pan-Africanism, the continuity of what that looks like and being able to lay the groundwork that every Black life is valuable, every oppressed life is valuable in relationship to fighting against police brutality and the politics of oppression in America would lead us to the conversation of what defunding the police. And actually, I would compare it to the conversation around reparation. This is not just about money. This is about repairing. This is about materials within our community. All of us know that when you look at a community that has resource, there's less crime. When you look at a community that don't have resource, there's more crime. There's more policing. So it didn't take me to go to University of Michigan to figure that one out. It's just to open my eyes up and seeing that what it is. And even having a conversation with some people recently, even the cities and communities that have abundance of police, you still don't see them. So that tells you right there. Why do you need all this police if you don't even see them? Right. So part of defunding is fundamentally poor communities can change overnight in terms of controlling the interests of our community without just hey, we're going to defund, but hey, this is where the funding need to be at. One of the things about community movement builders is that we're place-based in terms of using institutions, using land or in relationship to land as the ability to engage, organize, bring awareness to uplift black bodies. And so being able to put forth a perspective around defunding is one challenge in the state. When we challenge the state, we challenge the capitalism of the state. Capitalism that funds policing, that supports and protects buildings over bodies. So part of defunding is emphasizing, hey, if we invest in bodies, we invest in human beings, then we don't need more policing.
Let me just ask you real quick, when, you know, just to be clear, for community movement builders, defund the police does not mean redirect funds to private security forces owned by Koch brothers like entities, right? I just want to clarify that's not on the menu here. So, so as I hear you saying, Bunchy, defund the police means redistribute funds that would better help serve the people in need. Correct. I just want to,
just keeping the answer simple. Defunding police is an anti-capitalist approach. Mm. Okay. So to your point, in terms of, hey, we're not trying to redirect funds or redistribute funds that still has a capitalist agenda to it. Absolutely not.
Yes. I wanted to jump in.
Please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So in a different space, right? I think Yusef has brought that up in terms of addressing the reparations debate, right? So in the document, we talk about redistribution. So I think in the middle of the reparations debate, we want to be able to connect also with thinking about, well, what does this reparation look like in relation to indigenous people, right? And so really it's a redistribution at large that has to happen, right? With particularities, right? Because everybody's situation people were differently harmed, right? And so I think that's part of what we're thinking about, right? That defunding the police is part of this larger agenda of where is the money going to come from? Well, it's going to come from those places where, as the statement points out, right, doing what I think a lot of people hear the word neoliberalism, right? Like doing this shift, which is really a post-civil rights, right, moment shift that's coinciding with liberation movements all over the world, the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa, Asia, right? That the powers that be in the North, right, are going to be coordinating to figure out how are they going to manage these newly freed peoples of the world, right? And so this is this moment, right, that we're seeing this deep articulation, right, as we're moving out of the Cold War and the U.S. is emerging on top, right? That this is the moment that these changes that we're experiencing have come to intensify, right? It's the same, but operating in slightly different ways, right? But this is the moment that all the money gets taken away from social services and dumped into policing institutions, right? So police departments are getting more money than, let's say, right, putting the money towards counseling, right? Putting the money towards more counselors in schools rather than police officers, right? Like all the other places that we see an excess use of fear and violence, where there should actually be folks thinking about, right, safety and resolution, right, and transformation of people rather than breaking them, undoing them, right, and breaking families, communities, that comes with all of that. Mm-hmm. So we look at that moment, right, and so if we were talking about redistribution, then the money needs to go back to the social services, right? And taken away from these institutions that are not building us up, but rather, right, causing all kinds of issues in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So look, as we unfortunately turn to close here, I wanted to ask
we haven't even talked about the proposal, the demand. Okay. I don't want us to leave that on behind.
I'm working my segues. I'm working my transitions. You know what I'm saying? Let me do my thing. I'm just messing.
That's what I like.
That's what I'm saying. Let me do my thing. Step away from the DJ table. You know what I'm
saying? Yo, chill. Don't bump the table. I'm trying to mix. Yo, you call that mixing, man? I just helped you out. Thank you.
No, I'm just messing with you. No, seriously, as people go to, again, iMixWhatIlike.org and read the full statement, which is, you clearly it's not comprehensive, or exhaustive, but it does address a lot. And there are well over 20 platform planks and suggestions. The way I was going to, what I intended to ask here was to, and I'll start with Bunchy here. How would you like to see people develop methods to implement any of this? How are we encouraging? Again, right now there's all this debate about who we're supposed to vote for in November. What are we supposed to do? All this. what methods are you all suggesting be followed to implement some of this? Because again, whether it's I mean, you have a lot here. You're connecting, withdrawal. I mean, just like Malcolm said, the police do locally what the military does internationally. And the statement is talking about withdrawing troops from war zones and from our neighborhoods where people might be protesting or doing other work. You're talking about taking police out of schools. And I mean, there's a very specific set of ideas here. Again, how are you encouraging people to go about putting this into action?
So I'll just briefly touch four things. I think one, historically understanding the relationship between Black bodies and other oppressed bodies in relationship to the police and to America. Two, the most significant one for me is the incarceration of political prisoners, the demand and the acts for that. When we see other demands, other things to talk about defunding police, we don't see that, or it's very inconsistent. So fundamentally, in this work of organizing, any of us could be a political prisoner at any moment, a prisoner of war. So that's why that is very significant. Also, the ability to challenge us to rethink how our relationship to the police and how police, because many people, when they're saying defunding police, they're saying, well, no police? People, they get in this panic mode and not realizing, where did that come from? Like, we police ourselves every day. Again, when we say, hey, let's go back how it used to be. Also, again, many of us, when we talk about the Panthers or the Nation of Islam, times if I had a problem in my community, I'm going to call the Panthers, I'm going to call the Nation, brother act up, or get some good act right in his life, or a sister gets some act right in her life. So those are some of the fundamental things, and I'll just conclude on this. I mean, looking at those demands as principles. Fundamentally, what are the principles and values that are governing how we do this work? So I think that is part of the methodology, because again, right now, it's a lot of co-optation that's going on. Mm-hmm. And without the values and principles going on, we'll continue to allow ourselves to be co-opted and whatnot.
I mean, that's exactly why I was asking about the Koch brothers thing. I've already seen that happening. People are, defund the police, fine. We'll defund it and fund our private security force for you, Dr. Prosper, I start with the same kind of question. But you can even come back in if you have time after this. But specifically, I'm even curious, like, how do we, when you even talk about getting political prisoners on the agenda, is the call to have members of our communities go to existing politicians with this? Is the call to develop some kind of other political push within the existing parties, a different party? Is it to do something that has nothing to do with voting? I am a little curious how we are to advocate implementation of this beyond the beautifully outlined set of ideas. Dr. Prosper, go ahead.
Yeah. So the first proposal that we make, right, is that we say, we echo this call to defund the police, right, towards abolition, right? And folks will say, like Yusef says, right, well, there's no police, what's going to happen, right? And part of what we're proposing is a people's assemblies, right? So if we have this momentum of folks who are clearly demonstrating that they recognize it as a deep problem, right? We shouldn't lose that momentum and sort of burn it out and just protest, right? But also use it for people to start creating spaces to think through, right? What is the alternative to policing? When you say abolition, how can I imagine it out? Oftentimes we don't have the space to imagine it out. What is it going to look like? As Yusef says, right? The way we used to do it, right? But let's talk about that way that we used to do it, right? And why it's not there anymore and how we could come to new ways of doing similar things. So Community Movement Builders is already doing some of the in-between work of doing, I hate the term patrol because the police start out as called slave patrols, right? But for the time being, and this is part of our challenge, is to develop the new language, right, for things. But, right, patrolling the communities ourselves, right, and figuring out, because oftentimes the folks, and there's layers to it, right, but that one of our demands is that it has to be the people who are from the place, right, that do this work of not policing, but ensuring community safety and figuring out conflict resolution that's not about destroying, right, the people who are in this conflict, right? Obviously, we're talking about the community level here. So the proposal is to start out with these assemblies that would be the way for folks to have the space to imagine what kind of system that they want in their particular neighborhoods, and that the money from the police department is what's going to help support right, this process into a series of new policies and new regulations and new ways, right? And funding more counselors, more therapists, more folks with conflict resolution skills, right? Rather than folks who are trained for a couple of months to just shoot and kill anybody who is perceived as a threat, including someone you might come to assist from, a suicide call, and then the police ends up killing that person, right? Which is, well, why are they the first responders, right? And that there should no longer be this kill to shoot. I mean, if you're trained to shoot, don't shoot to kill, right? Like, I don't know, right? So rethinking.
I mean, that was one of Biden's suggestions, right?
I mean, I know, this is why I was trying to be careful not to, because then all of a sudden people can say, oh, there's a meme out there, like community movement. No, right? But why is the emphasis on, right, using lethal force, right? The People's Assemblies are also a place for people to think through, right? What does it mean for us to have, some kind of order in between us, right? That doesn't that's not policing people and breaking people, right? We need the room to imagine that for people to decide, right? That somebody in Newark may not think the same thing as Atlanta or Detroit, right? People are going to imagine out based on their situation what might be the system that they get to decide on, right? That's the proposal for how we could get to the many things, right? And some of us felt that in the meantime, we had to propose certain reforms, which is this long list of 24 things, including, for example, ending the cash bail system, or, right, letting go of all the folks who are considered vulnerable in this time of COVID out, right? And we have a list of all the folks who are considered vulnerable that shouldn't be, I mean, no one should be in prison, right? But that definitely not them at this time, right? In the meantime. So this is what I wanted to say, right? And in connection to the elections, if there's a momentum right now and people clearly have something to say, why is the choice only picked between these two white guys who are problematic and clearly capitalist, and one of them didn't know that no other U.S. president was ever racist apparently before Trump. So, right, disconnected from the realities of at least the folks that we're talking about, right, that we're concerned about, Black people at large. So.
At minimum, I'm happy to see just some organization of the ideas that should be helpful to people who are looking to find responses to all of this. Because again, to something Yusuf has already said, the appeal to co-opt is pretty strong in this moment. Any closing thoughts or anything else we want to add? Bunchy, I'll start with you.
I would say this. Your question is a very good question, and it's large in the sense of society. As an organization, we're grounded in being a community organizer, and so this platform, what we presented should be used as a community organizing strategy. As my comrade mentioned, again, in terms of People's Assembly's ability to get people engaged, some of it we can hit home run, or we may need to get on the first base, or it's multiple ways to use it. It's not a one be all. I mean, particularly in this society, when we do things, it's like, since Jesus was born or came back in 3 days, Moses parted the Red Sea, we always gotta do something of that magnitude. We know actions and change take time. And the first thing was coming together and developing this. And how does that look like in each city? How does that look like across the nation? But we created a framework to move from.
And I think, we're not yet decided or have made formal moves officially, right? But the idea that this is going to take more minds than just community movement builders, right, to come together towards anything next, right? So the document is also a kind of invitation, right, for conversations and thinking through and figuring out what it is that we can do at some point with other groups towards moving our general agenda of, right, Black liberation.
Right on. Well, I thank you both for taking the time to join us today and for obviously doing this work of putting out this statement. The statement, of course, can be found at iMixWhatILike.org, including contact information for community movement builders. We encourage everybody to engage conversation and ideas with this group and those involved. So again, thank you all very much. And as the brother said, hanging up there on the wall behind you, Yusuf, to you we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and catch you next time. Thanks again.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.